our presenter today, who is Carly Sciortino-Poulter. And Carly is the director of the IRCA Advocacy Network, and she's a fellow parent. So she comes with a double lens on how we support and the wonderful things that we can do to support individuals and families and all of those people who love and care for this population of individuals. So thanks, Carly.
Betty Lou, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for joining us today, everyone. As Betty Lou said, my name is Carly Sciortino-Poulter, and I'm with the ARC of Indiana, and I'm a fellow mom. So let's be honest, when you have a child with a disability, you are given a list of like 983 things to do. And signing up for the waiver is somewhere on that list. But the reality is, nobody ever bothers to explain what a waiver is, so you don't know why it's important. So it sits on the list until you get there. Well, I'll be honest, that's what we're going to start with today. We're going to start by explaining what in the world a Medicaid waiver actually is, how it can be helpful, and how you qualify for it and how you apply for it. And as we go along, by all means, please ask your questions, because frankly, this stuff can get really confusing on the best days, and people don't call me on their best days. But part of it is this is information that is evolving. We are about to make a lot of changes to Medicaid waivers, and so we're going to talk about some of those changes that are on the horizon. So there's a lot of, there's some misinformation out there when it comes to waivers, but there's also a lot of old information. So if I say something and you've heard something different, by all means ask. Let's clarify that. There's a good chance that it's just a matter of things have updated since then. So let's go ahead and get started. Uh, uh, and so, um, just a little bit about the ARC of Indiana. We're an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. We were established back in 1956 by families who wanted a better life for their kids with a disability, as simple as that sounds. But remember, this was 1956. If you had a child with a disability, you were told to place them in an institution. You were told don't go visit because that would be confusing and cruel. And then you were told to have another baby as soon as possible so that you wouldn't feel sad. And our parents said, forget that. I'm raising my own kid, and they're going to play baseball, and they're going to go to Sunday school, and they're going to learn to read just like their brothers and sisters. And that's how the ARC of Indiana was founded back in 1956. Today, we're the leading advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And one of the things that sets the ARC apart is that we cover the entire lifespan. There are fabulous organizations out there who focus exclusively on children, and goodness knows we need that, but we're here when they become older too. So we're here for the long haul. We are committed to progressive legislation and public policy that protects the rights and improves services for people with IDD. We are home to the ARC Master Trust, which is a way that you can set money aside for a person with a disability without jeopardizing their Medicaid or their Social Security benefits. We are also the founders of the Erskine Green Training Institute, which was the first of its kind in the country. It is a residential training program in Muncie where individuals with disabilities can learn either the hotel, restaurant, or hospital industry. And we are part of the ARC of the United States because the ARC is actually a national organization. So what in the world is a Medicaid waiver? Medicaid waiver is what we in Indiana call our Medicaid home and community-based services. And it's a combination of those home and community-based services and Medicaid health coverage. But the waiver tends to provide services that often aren't covered by health insurance. And they are designed to help people stay in the community and not go into some sort of institutional setting. But here's the catch. When you have a waiver, they don't look at family income and family assets. They only look at the individual's income and the individual's assets. So I will talk to families and they'll tell me, oh, they applied for the waiver, but they make too much money. And when I hear that, what I think is, you did the logical thing. It's called a Medicaid waiver. You would think you would go to the Medicaid office. But logic and government programs do not like to work and play well together. Even though this is even though this is a program that is part of Medicaid, you actually go to either the Bureau of Disability Services or or a local area agency on aging, depending on which waiver you're looking at, to apply. But like I said, they do look at the individual's income and the individual's. I tend to use the word assets. The state uses the word resources. Now, when I hear resources, I think of things like the library and the parks department. When I hear assets, I think money. So I tend to use assets. And an individual cannot have more than $2,000 in assets in their name, with several exceptions. And so if somebody has more than $2,000 in their name, they can start a special needs trust, like through the IRCA Master Trust, or an ABLE account to help maintain their eligibility. And there, like I said, there are a lot of exceptions to that $2,000 asset or resource limit, but that's a good rule of thumb. So here in Indiana, we have two different types of waivers. We have our skilled nursing waivers, which right now includes the aged and disabled waiver, or sometimes called the A&D waiver, and the traumatic brain injury, or TBI waiver. Then we have our developmental disability waivers. That's going to be the family support waiver, or the community integration and habilitation, or CIH waiver. Now, these waivers have very different focuses. Those skilled nursing waivers are designed for people who tend to have more medical needs or more physical disabilities. And there is no age limit on that waiver. So there are babies who are on the aged and disabled waiver. And yes, when you tell the parent of a 6-month-old to go to her local area agency on aging, she thinks you're crazy. But it's really designed for people who have more medical needs or more physical disabilities. But they are designed to help people stay in their homes and not go into a nursing home. So a lot of the services tend to be home-based. They do tend to be more medical in nature. The first one is the aged and disabled waiver. And in order to qualify for that, you need to meet nursing facility level of care. And then we do also have a traumatic brain injury waiver. There aren't a lot of people in Indiana on the traumatic brain injury waiver, but it does exist. And in order to qualify for that, you have to meet either nursing facility level of care or intermediate care facility for the intellectual and developmentally disabled level of care. Yes, that is a mouthful. Um, and you have to have a diagnosed traumatic brain injury. And the state of Indiana has a very specific definition for that. In order for it to be considered a traumatic brain injury, there had to be some outside force that caused it. So, for example, if somebody got into a car accident, if somebody got hurt, shaken baby syndrome qualifies as a traumatic brain injury because it was an outside force that caused that brain injury, as opposed to what's called an acquired brain injury, something like a stroke, or an individual who contracted meningitis that wound up causing a brain injury or cognitive impairment. So that TBI has to have been from some outside force. And to apply for those waivers, you're going to contact your local area agency on aging. In the Indianapolis area, for example, that's an agency called SACOA. But if you were to Google area agency on aging Indiana, you could get the map to figure out which one is yours, or you can call the 800 number for the Division of Aging to find out who your local AAA is. But there are some major changes coming to the skilled nursing waivers in July of this year. So first of all, the traumatic brain injury for people of any age will be moved from the Division of Aging to the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services. People tend to call that DARS for short, and the Bureau of Disability Services. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait, I thought it was the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. It was, but they changed their name last year because this change was on the horizon. So it is now the Bureau of Disability Services, and people still call it BEADS. Don't worry about that. And then for individuals who are currently on the aged and disabled waiver, if they are under age 60, they will be moved from the Division of Aging over to the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services and the Bureau of Disability Services. And starting July 1st, It will no longer be called the aged and disabled waiver. It will be renamed the health and wellness waiver. So that's one of the big changes that's on the horizon. The services are still going to be the same. It's just going to be overseen by a different agency. But you still go to your local area agency on aging to apply. Um, the goal is that for the first year, they want to keep things as much as they can to be the same, um, because they want as little disruption as possible. And then the state is going to restart waiver redesign for the beads waivers a little more in earnest. And so I do think that they're going to fold waiver redesign into these skilled nursing waivers as well, so that it'll make the health and wellness waiver work better for younger individuals. That's me making an educated guess. I'll be perfectly honest, but I do think that that is the intent. Um, and then, like I said, they want to keep things as consistent as possible, especially for that first year. So service plans are going to stay the same unless an individual wants to change them. Providers will stay the same. You can keep your current case manager as long as your case manager stays. And like I said, you still go to your local area agency on aging to apply for that. The biggest changes are coming for those individuals who are age 60 and older. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, Carly, why are we talking about this? This doesn't affect us. Well, I want to make sure that we're talking about it so that people know about it, but also because this may not affect your loved one with autism, but it may affect aging parents and aging grandparents. So I want you to have this information. So individuals who are age 60 or older, who are currently on the aged and disabled waiver, will be moved to managed care for both their health care and their waiver services. Again, the goal is to keep things as consistent as possible for year one. Those service plans will transition over to the managed care entity, and care managers from the managed care entity will replace what we call case managers. So in all honesty, it's just going to be a slight title switch. But 50% of those care managers have to come from the current AAA case managers. So there's a really good chance that you can keep your case manager, even if going into managed care. This will also, this is now going to be called the Pathways for Aging waiver. Also, individuals 60 and older who do not have intellectual or developmental disabilities and are in institutional settings like a nursing facility will also be moved to managed care. Now, the developmental disability waivers are very, very different. Those skilled nursing waivers are designed to help people stay in their homes and not go into nursing homes. The developmental disability waivers are designed to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities get out and be as active in the community as possible. So very, very different focus here. This provides supports for individuals who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, including autism. And there are two waivers through the developmental disability waivers. There's the family supports waiver, which is what everybody starts off with. And then there's what's called the community integration and habilitation, or CIH waiver. I'll be honest, everybody just calls it CIH because community integration and habilitation is just too long to say. But we were redesigning right before the pandemic hit. We were in the process of redesigning these waivers. And when I say right before the pandemic hit, I mean literally the last town hall we had on waiver redesign was literally the Wednesday before the world shut down. So they continued with making a few changes during the pandemic, but a lot of that went on hold. And so they were working on redesigning waivers to make them work better for families and self-advocates. I do think that they will restart waiver redesign again later this year or possibly early next year. But there are also a few minor changes that are coming to these developmental disability waivers July 1st of this year. They're adding one or two services, and they're also adding some flexibilities to current services, in particular to help support employment and to make it easier for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to explore employment, to try to find employment, and to support them as they are working in the community. Like I said, waiver redesign will likely be starting later this year. Um, and in part, the state is looking at redesigning waivers to help them better meet individuals' needs. Part of that is changing services to fit people's lives. Part of that is creating some more flexibility, and they've already done some of that. So, for example, we used to have two services. One was called community habilitation. One was called facility-based habilitation. During the pandemic, you know what? The state went ahead and merged those two together. They renamed it day habilitation, in part to create a whole lot more flexibility in how people could use those services. But they are considering lots of different options for that. We were doing town halls to get feedback from people, and the state was genuinely, listening to that feedback and trying to integrate that feedback into the um, plans that they were submitting. Like I said, I expect them to restart waiver redesign in more earnest later this year. And when they do that, they will absolutely restart that family and self-advocate engagement to hear from individuals and families about what they really need. And we've learned a lot over the last 3 years about, what we want and what we really need. And so they will restart those listening tours, and they will use that information to drive the changes that they propose. Now, to qualify for one of the developmental disability waivers, you have to have a diagnosed intellectual or developmental disability or related condition prior to age 22. That age 22 piece is a non-negotiable. That is set by the feds, and that's not something that they can be flexible on. And when we talk about an intellectual disability, I know we have a lot of people who aren't really sure what that means for sure. An intellectual disability is an IQ of around 70 or below. Okay. The condition has to be expected to continue indefinitely, and you must meet Medicaid eligibility in a waiver compatible category. Okay, that's a weird way to say that. So, what do I mean? Believe it or not, here in Indiana, we have 38 different types of Medicaid. When I started this job, I thought Medicaid was just Medicaid. I was wrong. Here in Indiana, we have 38 different types of Medicaid. Some of those categories of Medicaid work with waivers, some of them don't. So, for example, HIP 2.0 is not waiver compatible. So you have to be eligible for a type of Medicaid that is waiver compatible. Remember, family income and family assets are disregarded. But the big issue is that when an individual is over 18, they must be determined disabled by the Social Security Administration in order for them to have a waiver compatible category of Medicaid. Um, but having a diagnosis alone isn't enough. You also have to meet a certain level of care. And so BEAD staff will determine level of care with an will determine initial eligibility by doing a level of care screening. That's really about a 1 hour interview where they're going to ask all sorts of questions about what your loved one can do and what they need help with. And so you want to be honest about that. And you want to be realistic about it. If you have to, one of the questions, for example, is can the individual shower or bathe themselves? Well, if you have to direct them each step along the way, okay, let's put the shampoo in. Now let's rinse it out. Now let's put in the conditioner. If you have to do something like that, get the water ready, direct them through all of that, even if they're the ones to do it, they can't do it independently. And that makes a big difference for this. So you want to think about what your loved ones can do completely on their own, because that's really what they're trying to figure out. But then they're also going to review other documentation, like a psychological evaluation, like your educational records and your IEP, like medical records. They're going to look at all of that. And then they look to see if you have to have substantial functional limitations in 3 out of the following 6 areas. First, they're looking at mobility. Then they're looking at understanding and use of language. They're looking at self-care. They're looking at learning, and that doesn't strictly mean IQ. That means things like, do you need specialized instruction? Can you generalize a skill? Does it take you longer to learn? Those are the types of things they're looking at in learning. Then there's also self-direction, or what I kind of nicknamed the initiation section, because it's all about, can you make plans and follow through with them? And for a lot of individuals on the spectrum, especially, it's that follow through piece that is challenging. And then also capacity for independent living. Now, they will do that level of care screening on anyone who's age 6 or older. If they're under age 6, they're going to adjust it to make it more age appropriate, because I kid you not, some of the questions are things like, can he go to the bank by himself? Can he cook? Can he refill his own prescriptions? Okay, not even typical 6-year-olds can do those things. So especially if your loved one is young, you know, I think you've got less to worry about. And I don't want you to worry about any of those things. And if you have questions about that, you're welcome to call us at the ARC and we can talk with you about all of that. So now let's talk about the application process, because I will tell you it is so much easier than it used to be. During the pandemic, the state actually put the application online. And so you can go to that website or you can use that QR code and it will take you straight to the application. I kid you not, it takes all of 5 minutes to fill out. The two hardest things are tracking down your kid's social security number and remembering that every time it says you, it really means your loved one. So yes, they are asking for a 4-year-old's marital status. Okay. But take the opportunity. Like I said, takes all of 5 minutes. Go ahead and apply now. There is one question that asks, how does the disability affect the individual? They are just looking for 2 or 3 sentences. I know we can all write books about it, but this is really just to get your foot in the door. Okay. It's really that level of care screening where they're going to get more into the details. Now, there is a waiting list for the Family Supports Waiver, and that waiting list is maintained by the Bureau of Disability Services. Targeting slowed during the pandemic, and so now I think comfortably we can say that the waiting list is about 2.5 years long, which I know is a while, but not that long ago, it was a 15-year waiting list. So it's certainly getting better. But if you're not sure if you've applied before or you're not sure where you're at, there is also a waiting list portal to verify your application date. And so if you are on the waiting list, you will see your loved one's information, you will see your information, and you should see an application date. If you don't see an application date, that's when you call BEADS to find out, just to check in and say, I was checking on this. I don't see an application date. Is there an issue? That way you can kind of work some of those things out. But here's the thing. BEADS always goes based off of your application date, meaning when did you get that application filled out? Okay, when did it get submitted? And that's the date that they go by. You can access the waiting list portal through this website. It's probably going to be a whole lot easier to Google BEADS waitlist portal and find out that way. And you want to make sure that you are updating your address and your contact information and keeping that current. And you can do that through that waitlist portal, because when your loved one is called up on the waiting list, the state uses the term targeted. When they are targeted for the waiver, they're going to send you things by US mail. So you need to make sure that your address and your contact information is up to date. And you can do that through that portal. Now, there are 2 groups who can request priority status. Um, Anyone who is between 18 and 24 who has finished school, meaning that they've either graduated and gotten their diploma or they've gotten their certificate of completion, they can request priority status and they jump to the front of the line, because the state recognizes how hard it is to go from being in school and having all sorts of resources and supports to suddenly having nothing. And they don't want that to happen. So 18 to 24-year-olds who have finished school can request priority status and jump to the front of the line. The other group who can do that are the children of active duty service members and veterans. All you have to do is provide a copy of your DD 214 and request that priority status, and your child jumps to the front of the line. So with the Family Supports Waiver, this is where most people start. And what makes the Family Supports Waiver a little bit different is that this has a capped budget for services. Now, it has increased a few times during the pandemic. And so in 2024, the maximum budget for the family support waiver is $26,000, $26,482 in waiver services. That has nothing to do with the medical services side of things. So if your child is getting, speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, that does not come out of that waiver budget. Betty Lou, it looks like we've got a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, we
Okay,
do. We have a question, so I'm popping in.
sure.
Yes, so Sarah asked, I get hung up on the question on the application that asks for the age the applicant was diagnosed with a
Huh?
development or intellectual disability.
Okay.
What diagnoses meet this criteria?
So for example, if somebody has been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, meaning an IQ of around 70 or below, that's how old. Basically, they want to make sure that they were aged younger. Wow, spoke really well there. They want to make sure that somebody was under age 22 when they were diagnosed. When did they get that autism diagnosis? If they have cerebral palsy, what age were they? If they developed a seizure disorder, that is also a qualifying criteria for the waiver. When did those seizures begin? Those are the types of things that they're looking for.
Mhm. So Carly, if some of our individuals were young, like maybe young, like and sometimes upon birth, right, we
Right.
have some complications. So from that point that they
Mhm.
have, because different medical diagnosis versus educational eligibility, correct? We're talking
Correct.
about medical diagnosis, and
Yeah,
that's the
you
requirement. Even if you have an educational eligibility, you have to have the medical diagnosis, correct?
you do.
Okay.
Now
Yeah.
one of the things I will say too is that, the medical community and the education community, for the most part, use completely different evaluations when they're doing their psychological evaluations. That's why the educational determination isn't good enough in this particular case. There are two types of tests that both communities tend to use. That's the Wechsler IQ test, and an evaluation called the ADOS,
Mhm.
which is an autism evaluation. And so sometimes, like if your school did the Wechsler IQ test and your child's IQ is 62, oftentimes you can take that to the pediatrician and the pediatrician will accept that because it's the same medical test. Sometimes, the pediatrician may say, you know what, I think we need to go out for more medical testing, and they'll send you out for it at that point. Okay. But yeah, and literally, sometimes the answer to that question of when were they first diagnosed is zero.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
a child with Down syndrome was born with Down syndrome. It's not like you suddenly develop it at age
Right.
30,
Right.
so
Right.
sometimes we have that.
So, and at that point, when they're that young, you're not
Mhm.
doing any psychological until they're a little, like if it's birth. I think that's, I just have that. And I think I
Yeah,
kind of piggybacks that, right? It's
sure.
like if I'm born with a varying ability, like Down
Right,
syndrome, and it's clear,
right.
and then, but there's really, from a educational standpoint, you can start getting some things like through first steps and so forth.
Mhm.
But psychological testing may not happen right
Yeah,
away. And I'm thinking from an
right,
outside medical would
right.
be worried about all the other stuff. But yeah, so
Well,
I
and
guess I want to,
and
yeah.
here and here's the thing. If you have a child with Down syndrome, for example, we know that at birth. It's not like you have to wait until they're old enough to get a psychological evaluation to
Okay,
apply.
I think that was my
You know,
question too. Is like
okay.
that's
Yeah,
part of that, but
right.
that's not an end all be all, right? That you have
Correct.
to be part. Okay,
Correct.
excellent. Yeah,
It's really about what type of disability do they have and how is it diagnosed. Cerebral
so
palsy is not diagnosed through a psychological evaluation. Those
correct.
are, that's a more medical diagnosis. And so once you have that diagnosis, whatever it is, if it's an intellectual or a developmental disability, then that's when you can apply. Um, Let me give you an example though of one that would not. So I've had some individuals where their child has juvenile muscular dystrophy. That's not technically a developmental disability, but it is still a medical condition, and that child would likely be able to qualify for a waiver through the area agency on aging, what is currently called the aged and disabled and will eventually become the health and wellness waiver, would be something along those lines. Okay, does that help?
Perfect. I think that's great. And Sarah, I hope that answers your question. If not, then please provide more in the chat box. Thanks, Carly.
Absolutely. So then we also have what's called the Community Integration and Habilitation, or CIH waiver. This is now an emergency-based waiver. So if you've ever heard somebody talk about the big waiver, or we used to have an autism waiver and a developmental disabilities waiver. Those two got merged together and renamed the CIH waiver, but it is now emergency based. In order to qualify for this, first of all, you've got to be eligible for a waiver in general, and then you have to meet one of the priority categories. But what makes the CIH waiver different is that instead of having that $26,000 cap for services, the budget for services is based on the individual's needs. They look at age, they look at their health conditions, they look at their living situations and their needs to determine their budget for services. Now, the priority categories for that CIH waiver include loss or incapacity of the caregiver when there's no other caregiver available. So if mom passes away and there's nobody to take over, that's when a person can get a CIH waiver. Caregivers over the age of 80 when no other caregivers are available. So if dad is 80, but mom is 78, we still got to wait until mom is 80 as well. Okay. There have been efforts in the last couple of years to try to lower that age. Those efforts haven't been successful quite yet, but we're certainly not giving up on that either. Extraordinary health and safety risk. And they really mean extraordinary health and safety risk. I have a lot of people who will call because they want a CIH waiver because school is now over and there's no one to stay with the individual while mom and dad are at work. That's not an extraordinary health and safety risk. That's just a regular safety risk. So that would not qualify for a CIH waiver. Those are the three main criteria people think of, but there are three others that are also out there. The next one is aging out of a childhood placement, either by the Department of Education or the Department of Child Services. So let's say, for example, we've got a child who's in foster care and they age out of foster care. That would be a reason for a CIH waiver. Let's say we have an individual who has been placed either by Department of Education or by Department of Child Services in a residential facility, but they are aging out. It's not just that they're ready to come home, it's that they're aging out of that placement. That can be grounds for a CIH waiver. Leaving an institutional setting like a nursing facility, like a state-operated facility, which would be a state hospital. Supervised group living, which is the formal name for a group home, or an intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities. Those are leaving that institutional setting, not because you're ready for discharge, but because you want to leave and you want to return to the community. That would be grounds for granting a CIH waiver. And then substantiated cases of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Now, the BEADS waiver services are designed to be person-centered. They're designed to be individualized, and they're designed to help self-advocates be an active and integrated part of the community, to learn those independent living skills, to supplement their needs, and to work toward that self-advocate's vision of a good life. In doing so, you create something called a person-centered individualized support plan. I tend to joke, think IEP without the drama. And so that PCISP, because we tend to speak an alphabet soup instead of words, that's going to list the hopes and the desires and the needs of the individual. It's going to describe their life circumstance, and it's going to chart a path for their individualized support team to follow in supporting the individual achieve their vision of a good life. And I keep using that phrase, achieve their vision of a good life, because that really is BEAD's focus. It is to help people achieve their vision of a good life. And in doing so, they use something called the life course framework. And the core belief behind life course is that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life's aspirations in their community. With Life Course, there are some guiding principles, in part to help people define what they want in life and what they don't want in life, because sometimes that's the easier thing to do, to help determine an individual's strengths, to determine what resources they already have in their lives regarding technology, community supports, relationships, and eligibility specific resources, to help identify their vision of a good life, and to determine the skills and resources they need to achieve that good life. And so, Life Course has all sorts of resources and tools to help people figure those things out. Excuse me. You can find all of these at lifecoursetools.com. They have tons of tools, they've got tons of materials, they've got all sorts of videos, and most importantly, it is all free. And free is good. So I'm going to quickly go through several of these because I know that we are getting close to time here. But this is something called a life trajectory. This is actually one of my favorite tools, in part because it's, what do you want in life? What are the past experiences you've had that are helping you get to that life? What are the things you still need moving forward to get what you want? And just as importantly, what do you not want in life? What are the past experiences that have been taking you there? And what are the things we need to be careful of so that you don't go down that path? This is another part of it. This is what I like to call a cheat sheet to the person, because here in that top box, it's what do people like and admire about me? In the middle box, what's important to me? And there in the bottom, how do you best support me? Imagine if you could give that to your loved one's teacher at the beginning of school year or something like that. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Here's an integrated support star to think about what types of resources you have available. And then all sorts of examples for all of that. I apologize, everybody. But when it comes to those services, believe it or not, we've got about 30 different services available through the waiver. And here are some of the more popular ones. So first of all, everybody is required to have a case manager. And that case manager is really going to be your guide through the process. They're there to help you find what resources are out there, help you figure out what you want that waiver to do for you, and then help you get that. One of the other really common ones is something called Participant Assistance and Care, or PAC services. I mentioned earlier about day habilitation services. Excuse me. Behavior supports is a really, really important one. Music therapy, recreation therapy, adult day services. And like I said, there are a lot of services available to help people with employment. So what can you do right now while you're waiting for the waiver? Well, part of it is to think about your needs and your wants and your dreams. Use those life course tools now to help you figure out what is it that you want in life, what's already available to you to help you achieve that good life, and potentially apply for some other supports while you wait to possibly continue to use them when you do get the waiver. So some of that could be things like children's special health care services. Um, which can provide some additional health coverage for children under 21 with serious chronic medical conditions. That could be pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS, which is available for people 14 to 24 to work on those pre-employment skills, those foundational employment skills. You may be able to get services through Vocational Rehabilitation Services, which is a state agency whose purpose is to help people with disabilities find jobs. Also, things like Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, to help with basic living expenses. The Children's Mental Health Initiative to help provide some mental health supports for children who also have co-occurring IDD, as well as medical supports and other community programs. Some of those can include things like faith-based organizations, your local YMCA, Libraries and parks have all sorts of programming, and they may not be specifically designed for disabilities, but they tend to be more welcoming environments. And so we can use those programs and services for more of those inclusion-based programming. Things like Self Advocates of Indiana, Special Olympics, Best Buddies, local support groups, different service organizations, and especially things like volunteering, and maybe even getting a job. But the big thing I want you to know is that we are here to help. So anytime you have questions, or if you're having problems, or frankly, if you have no idea what to do next, give us a call here at the ARC. Talk with any one of our family advocates. Every single one of us is either a parent, a self-advocate, or a sibling. So we all live this life too. And I think that that makes a big difference in all of this. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I see we've got at least one other question that may have come in. So please ask whatever questions you have.
Hey, Carly. First, Kevin just said he didn't have questions, but thanks so much for this. This is exactly information that a lot of our families and educators are looking for,
Oh,
because
absolutely.
that's part of being in our education system, is to also help families and caregivers have the right information to help guide that. Um,
And
so yeah.
one of the big things that I would recommend is find an organization you trust. Sign up for IRCA's newsletter that comes out. Sign up for the ARC's newsletter, so that you can keep up to date with all of the changes that are occurring, because that's one of the biggest things that's going on right now, is really just that we're constantly evolving, we're constantly making changes,
Right.
and we want to make sure that you know what's going on. And that's one of the easiest ways to do that.
Perfect. Elizabeth was asking about the contact information for ARC, and I just want to make sure. So on that last slide,
Mhm.
we had the 800 number, which is 1-800-382-9100.
Right.
And then also more local number would be 317-977-2375. And
Absolutely.
then www.arcind.org will
Mhm.
take you right to the website.
It will.
Yeah. And just a couple other. So when you were talking about application and you talked about the 2.5 years, which is, like you said, has changed and it still feels like a lot. But what I always try to guide, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is like the earlier the better. Like the
Absolutely.
earlier for applying, the better, because sometimes we wait, right? We
Absolutely.
wait.
You know what? And I talk to a lot of families who also kind of beat themselves up because they haven't done it yet. You know what? Like I said, we get a list of 983 things to do. Honey, you are working that list, you just hadn't gotten there yet. Today, let's move it up a little bit higher on the priority list because it's easy to do. You know,
Right.
don't beat yourself up
Yes.
over it. You had
No,
other things you needed to do first.
well, no doubt. Like there's a lot that's on the like a to-do list kind of thing. And often I felt like sometimes when we're doing with some of the medical, like you have a lot going on, and so you need to
Right.
prioritize, and if you don't
Right.
have the information, you may not realize for priority. Anita says thanks so much. It's super important information.
You know
And
what? I
yeah.
remember when my son was diagnosed, and I remember them telling me to sign up for it. And I thought, oh, we have health insurance. We don't need that, because I was naive. And it was about 2 years later when another mom pulled me aside, and I swear she should have just patted me on my head, because that was what the conversation was like. She was like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, dear. This is for when he's an adult, and you have to sign up for it now, because
Yeah.
that's back when we had the 15 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I did, because
Yeah.
another mom really told me I needed to do it. So I did it. In the end, we wound up waiting about 10 years instead of the 15. But it's one of those things where, you know what? Just do it as soon as you can.
Yeah, for sure. I mean that, yeah, and it's great to have mentors out there. We do have a question. This is they have a son on the family support waiver wait
Mhm.
list, FSW
Okay.
wait list. However, I'm concerned if this is needed or not. He was adopted through DCS and
Uh-huh.
had adoption Medicaid.
Sure.
We haven't had any issues with paperwork for it. However,
Mhm.
I've seen with the Medicaid changes that others are risking losing Medicaid if they don't turn in the paperwork and all of the process, et cetera. With
Yeah.
the coming Medicaid changes, is it still a good idea to stay on the wait list?
Yes, is the quick answer to that. And so here's where this is exactly why it gets so confusing because we're actually talking two different programs here. You're talking about the Medicaid health insurance side of things, and the fact that your child has a